Sarah Mitchell walked into the small-town diner with nothing but a worn backpack and the clothes on her back. At 38, she looked like any other woman trying to start over after life had knocked her down. Her jeans were faded, her sneakers had seen better days, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. What people couldn't see were the scars hidden beneath her long sleeves, or the way her eyes automatically scanned every room for exits and potential threats. She had arrived in Millbrook 3 days ago on a Greyhound bus, carrying everything she owned. The small town in rural Tennessee seemed like the perfect place to disappear and heal from wounds that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. After 20 years in the Navy, including 8 years as a SEAL operator, Sarah was trying to figure out who she was in civilian clothes. The diner was nearly empty at 2 in the afternoon. Sarah chose a corner booth that gave her a clear view of the entrance and ordered coffee and a sandwich from Betty, the kind-faced waitress who seemed to run the place. Betty didn't ask questions, which Sarah appreciated. Too many people wanted to know her story, and she wasn't ready to tell it. As Sarah ate her sandwich and watched the lazy afternoon traffic through the window, the diner's atmosphere changed. The bell above the door chimed, and 3 men walked in like they owned the place. The largest one, a man with a beer belly straining against a dirty work shirt, surveyed the room with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. His name was Dale Carpenter, though Sarah didn't know that yet. What she could tell immediately was that he was the kind of man who used his size and loud voice to intimidate others. His 2 companions, both smaller but equally rough around the edges, followed his lead as they settled into a booth near the counter. Betty's demeanor changed instantly. Her friendly smile disappeared, replaced by a carefully neutral expression. She approached their table with obvious reluctance, and Sarah's trained eyes picked up on the subtle signs of fear. The way Betty's shoulders tensed, how she avoided direct eye contact, the slight tremor in her voice when she asked what they wanted to order. Dale didn't bother looking at the menu. Instead, his small eyes fixed on Sarah in her corner booth. She kept eating, giving no indication she had noticed his attention, but every sense was alert. Years of training had taught her to appear relaxed while staying ready for anything. After ordering, Dale turned his attention to Betty. His voice was loud enough for everyone in the diner to hear. He complained about the coffee being too weak, demanded fresh pie even though he could see the case was empty, and made crude comments about Betty's appearance. The other 2 men laughed on cue, enjoying the show. Sarah watched Betty's face flush with embarrassment and anger she couldn't express. The older woman had probably dealt with men like Dale her entire life, men who thought their size and gender gave them the right to humiliate others. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. This wasn't her fight, and she was trying to leave that part of her life behind. But when Dale grabbed Betty's wrist as she tried to refill his coffee, everything changed. The contact was unnecessary and aggressive, meant to show dominance. Betty tried to pull away, but Dale's grip tightened. Sarah set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Every movement was controlled, purposeful. She had hoped to avoid confrontation, to blend into this small town and find peace, but some things couldn't be ignored, and watching a bully terrorize an innocent woman was one of them. She stood up slowly, her movements fluid and confident. Dale noticed immediately and released Betty's wrist, turning his attention to Sarah with obvious interest. He probably thought this would be even more entertaining than picking on the older waitress. Sarah walked toward their table, her footsteps silent despite her worn sneakers. Years of moving through hostile territory had taught her how to approach a target without making a sound. Dale and his friends had no idea they were being assessed by someone who had tracked terrorists through urban war zones. As she got closer, Sarah could smell the alcohol on Dale's breath despite the early hour. His companions were watching her with the kind of predatory interest that made her skin crawl. They saw a lone woman, possibly homeless, certainly vulnerable. They had no idea how wrong they were. Dale smiled as Sarah approached, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. He was enjoying this, probably thinking about how he could humiliate both women for his entertainment. His friends were already chuckling, anticipating whatever crude comments their leader would make. Sarah stopped about 3 feet from their table, just outside of grabbing distance. Her stance appeared casual, but she was perfectly balanced, ready to move in any direction. Her hands hung loose at her sides, but her fingers were positioned exactly where they needed to be. The diner fell silent except for the soft country music playing from an old radio behind the counter. Even Betty had stopped moving, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The air felt thick with tension, like the moment before a storm breaks. Dale leaned back in his booth, spreading his arms wide in a gesture meant to display dominance. His voice was loud and mocking when he spoke, designed to embarrass Sarah in front of everyone present. He had no idea he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Sarah looked at him calmly, her expression giving away nothing. Behind her quiet exterior, tactical calculations were running through her mind. Threat assessment, escape routes, potential weapons within reach. It was automatic after years of training, as natural as breathing. What happened next would depend entirely on Dale's choice. Sarah hoped he would back down, apologize to Betty, and leave quietly. But she could see in his eyes that his ego wouldn't allow that kind of retreat. He was committed to this course of action, probably had been since the moment he walked through the door. The 3 men had picked their target carefully, or so they thought. A woman alone, seemingly defenseless, in a place where no one would intervene. They expected easy victims and an audience for their cruelty. Instead, they had chosen to confront someone who had survived combat situations that would have broken most people. Sarah Mitchell was about to remind them that appearances could be very deceiving, and that sometimes the person who looks most vulnerable is actually the most dangerous one in the room. Dale's voice cut through the silence like a rusty blade. "Well, well, looks like we got ourselves another piece of trash wandering into our town." His friends snickered, emboldened by their leader's confidence. "You look like you've been sleeping rough, honey. Maybe you need someone to teach you some manners." Sarah remained perfectly still, her voice calm when she finally spoke. "I think you owe the lady an apology." Her words were quiet, but clear, carrying an authority that seemed to come from nowhere. Dale's laugh was harsh and ugly. "You think I owe anybody anything? Lady, you picked the wrong place to play hero." He stood up slowly, using his full height to try to intimidate her. At 6'3" and nearly 300 pounds, he was used to people backing down when he rose to his full size. Sarah didn't move an inch. If anything, she seemed to relax further, which only made Dale angrier. He wasn't used to people not showing fear when he demonstrated his physical dominance. The woman in front of him seemed almost bored, which wounded his pride more than any insult could have. Betty had retreated behind the counter, her face pale with worry. She had seen Dale and his friends terrorize other people before, and it never ended well for those who stood up to them. She wanted to help Sarah, but years of experience had taught her that intervention only made things worse. The 2 men who had come with Dale were now standing as well, flanking their leader in a practiced intimidation formation. They had done this before, cornered people who couldn't fight back and enjoyed watching them break. The thin one on the left kept flexing his hands, eager for violence. The stocky one on the right was already grinning in anticipation. Sarah's eyes moved between all 3 men, cataloging their positions, their likely attack patterns, their obvious weaknesses. The big one in the middle was slow and overconfident. The thin one was twitchy, probably a drug user based on his constant movement and dilated pupils. The stocky one was the most dangerous because he was staying calm and watching carefully. Dale took a step closer, invading Sarah's personal space in a deliberate act of aggression. "I don't know where you crawled out from, but you need to learn your place. Around here, we don't tolerate homeless trash telling decent people what to do." The smell of stale beer and cigarettes washed over Sarah as Dale leaned down, trying to use his size advantage. His face was inches from hers now, close enough that she could see the broken blood vessels in his nose and the yellow stains on his teeth. He expected her to back down, to apologize, to show the fear that would feed his ego. Instead, Sarah spoke in the same calm tone. Last chance to walk away. There was something in her voice now, a cold certainty that made even Dale hesitate for a moment, but his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of his friends and the waitress. Dale's hand shot out to grab Sarah's shoulder, intending to shove her backward and assert his dominance. It was exactly the wrong move to make against someone with Sarah's training. Her response was lightning fast and surgical in its precision. She caught his wrist with her left hand while simultaneously striking his elbow joint with her right palm. The movement was small and looked almost gentle, but Dale's arm was suddenly hyperextended and completely under Sarah's control. The big man's face went from confident to confused to agonized in the span of 2 seconds. Sarah applied just enough pressure to make her point without breaking anything. Yet. Dale tried to pull away but found himself completely helpless. The slight pressure Sarah was applying to his hyperextended arm sent waves of pain through his entire body. He had to rise up on his toes just to prevent his elbow from dislocating. His 2 friends moved to help him, but Sarah's voice stopped them cold. "I wouldn't." The tone was conversational. But there was something underneath it that spoke of serious consequences. Both men froze, suddenly uncertain about their next move. Betty watched from behind the counter in amazement. She had never seen anyone handle Dale Carpenter like this. The man who had terrorized half the town was now dancing on his tiptoes, completely at the mercy of a woman half his size. Sarah maintained her hold while speaking directly to Dale. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Betty for grabbing her and being disrespectful. Then you and your friends are going to leave, and you're not going to bother anyone in this diner ever again." Dale's face was red with pain and embarrassment. He tried to speak through gritted teeth. "You don't know who you're messing with, lady. I got friends in this town. I got connections." Sarah applied a fraction more pressure, and Dale gasped. "Your connections won't help you if I decide to pop this joint," she said matter-of-factly. "I've done it before to people much more dangerous than you." The thin man on the left was getting agitated, his hands clenching and unclenching. "Let him go, you crazy witch, or we'll—" Sarah's eyes flicked to him, and whatever he saw there made him stop talking immediately. "You'll what?" she asked quietly. "You'll try to rush me while I'm controlling your friend's arm? You'll give me an excuse to really hurt him?" The stocky man grabbed his agitated friend's arm, warning him to stay still. Unlike his companions, he recognized that they were dealing with someone who knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't luck or a fluke. The woman had training, serious training. Dale was beginning to panic as the reality of his situation sank in. The pain in his arm was constant, and he could feel how close he was to serious injury. One wrong move from him, one slight adjustment from her, and he would be looking at months of physical therapy. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the diner. Okay, he gasped. "Just let me go and we'll leave." Sarah shook her head slightly. "That's not what I said. Apologize to Betty first, and make it sincere." Dale looked toward the counter where Betty was watching with wide eyes. His pride rebelled against apologizing, especially in front of his friends, but the alternative was worse. "I'm sorry, Betty, for grabbing you and being rude." Sarah looked at Betty, who nodded that the apology was acceptable. Only then did she release Dale's arm, stepping back to give all 3 men room to leave. Dale rubbed his arm, glaring at Sarah with hatred and humiliation. "This isn't over," he muttered. Sarah's expression didn't change. "Yes, it is. And if you're smart, you'll make sure it stays that way." There was something final in her tone, a promise that further confrontation would not go well for them. The three men gathered themselves and headed for the door, Dale still rubbing his arm and shooting venomous looks back at Sarah. As they reached the exit, the stocky one grabbed Dale's other arm. "We need to find out who she is," he whispered urgently. "That wasn't normal. That was professional." Dale jerked his arm away, his ego still too bruised to listen to reason. "I don't care who she thinks she is. Nobody humiliates me in my own town." As the door closed behind them, Sarah returned to her booth and calmly finished her coffee. Betty approached hesitantly, still processing what she had just witnessed. "Thank you," Betty said quietly. "I don't know what you did, but I've never seen Dale back down from anyone before." Sarah shrugged, as if controlling a man twice her size was the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes bullies just need to be reminded that not everyone is afraid of them. But even as she spoke, Sarah knew this wasn't over. She had seen the look in Dale's eyes as he left, the combination of rage and wounded pride that made men like him dangerous. He would be back, probably with more friends, definitely with a plan. Sarah Mitchell had come to this small town looking for peace, hoping to leave her past behind. Instead, she had just made enemies of exactly the kind of people who wouldn't let things go. The quiet life she had been seeking was about to become much more complicated. Sarah knew they would come back. Men like Dale Carpenter didn't handle public humiliation well, especially when it came from someone they perceived as weaker. She spent the rest of the afternoon walking around Millbrook, memorizing the layout of streets, identifying potential choke points and escape routes. Old habits from her military days were kicking in whether she wanted them to or not. By evening, Sarah had rented a small room above the town's only hardware store. The elderly owner, Mr. Peterson, asked no questions and accepted cash for the first month's rent. The room was sparse but clean, with a single window that provided a clear view of Main Street below. Around 9 o'clock, as Sarah was settling in for the night, she heard vehicles pulling up outside. She moved to the window and peered down through the curtains. 3 pickup trucks had parked across the street, and she counted 8 men getting out. Dale was there, along with his 2 friends from the diner, plus 5 others who looked cut from the same cloth. They weren't trying to be subtle. Dale was pointing at different buildings, clearly trying to figure out where Sarah might be staying. His arm was in a makeshift sling, which told Sarah he had been to see someone about the damage she had done earlier. One of the new arrivals was particularly concerning. He was older than the others, probably in his 50s, with the kind of lean, weathered look that suggested military background. Unlike the others, he moved with purpose and discipline. When he spoke, the other men listened carefully and followed his directions without argument. Sarah watched as they split up into pairs, beginning a systematic search of the businesses that might rent rooms. It was actually a decent tactical approach, which confirmed her suspicion about the older man's background. Dale might have been the leader by default, but someone with actual training was now calling the shots. She had 2 choices: run or stand her ground. Running would be smart. She could slip out the back, disappear into the night, and be 3 states away by morning. It was what her instructors would have recommended. Never engage when you're outnumbered unless you have no other option. But something held her back. Maybe it was the memory of Betty's frightened face in the diner. Maybe it was the knowledge that these men would eventually find another target for their aggression. Or maybe she was just tired of running from who she used to be. Sarah opened her backpack and removed items she had hoped never to need again. A tactical knife with a black blade that reflected no light. A small pouch containing zip ties and other restraints. A device that looked like a cell phone but served a very different purpose. She changed clothes, trading her civilian outfit for dark clothing that would blend into shadows. Her movements were efficient and automatic, muscle memory taking over from years of similar preparations in hostile territory. A soft knock on her door interrupted her preparations. Sarah froze, knife in hand, until she heard Mr. Peterson's voice. "Miss Mitchell, there are some men downstairs asking about you. I told them I don't give out information about my tenants, but they're being pretty insistent." Sarah crept to the door and spoke quietly. "Are they threatening you, Mr. Peterson?" There was a pause before he answered. "Not in so many words, but the implication is clear. I've called the sheriff's office, but Deputy Morrison is Dale's cousin, so I don't expect much help from that quarter." Sarah smiled grimly. Small-town politics and family connections. It figured. "Thank you for the warning, Mr. Peterson. You should probably stay downstairs where other people can see you." "What about you?" "I'll be fine." Sarah heard Mr. Peterson's footsteps retreating down the wooden stairs. Through her window, she could see two men had positioned themselves to watch the building's front entrance. The back exit would be covered too if they had any sense. She moved to the window and carefully examined the building's exterior. The hardware store was old, built when craftsmanship mattered. There was decorative stonework that would provide handholds, and the roof of the adjacent building was close enough to reach. Sarah secured her gear and opened the window. The night air was cool against her face as she climbed out onto the narrow ledge that ran along the building's second story. Her movements were silent and sure, each handhold tested before committing her full weight. The older man's voice carried up from the street as he coordinated his search teams. "Check the alley behind the building. If she's not inside, she might try to run that way." His tone was professional, calm. This wasn't his first manhunt. Sarah smiled to herself as she moved across the rooftop of the adjacent building. They were thinking like hunters pursuing prey, not soldiers dealing with an enemy combatant. It was an understandable mistake, but one that would cost them. She had circled around behind the searchers when she heard commotion from inside the hardware store. Raised voices, the sound of something breaking. They had lost patience with Mr. Peterson's cooperation and decided to take a more direct approach. That changed everything. Sarah had been willing to disappear and let them save face, but threatening an innocent old man crossed a line she wouldn't tolerate. Some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. The first man never saw her coming. He was watching the rear exit from a position behind a dumpster when Sarah materialized out of the shadows. A precise strike to a specific pressure point on his neck, and he collapsed unconscious without making a sound. The second rear guard was more alert, but not alert enough. He started to turn when he heard a slight noise behind him, but Sarah's arm was already around his throat in a sleeper hold. He struggled for 10 seconds before joining his companion in unconsciousness. 2 down, 6 to go. Sarah zip-tied both unconscious men and moved toward the front of the building. She could see Dale and another man standing guard by the trucks while the older man led the search inside. The remaining 2 were probably covering other potential exits. She activated the device that looked like a cell phone. It wasn't designed to make calls, but to jam electronic communications within a specific radius. The searchers' radios and cell phones would be useless for the next hour. Moving like a ghost through the shadows, Sarah positioned herself behind the 2 men watching the trucks. Dale was still nursing his injured arm and complaining loudly about what he planned to do when they caught her. His companion, a younger man with nervous energy, kept checking his phone and wondering why he couldn't get a signal. Sarah could have taken them both down immediately, but she wanted information first. She needed to understand exactly how deep this corruption went and whether there would be more problems after tonight. She emerged from the shadows behind them, her voice cutting through Dale's complaints. "Looking for someone?" Both men spun around, Dale reaching for something in his jacket while his companion stumbled backward in surprise. Sarah was already moving, disarming Dale before his hand could close on whatever weapon he carried. The second man found himself face down on the pavement with Sarah's knee in his back before he fully understood what was happening. Dale stared at her in the dim streetlight, finally beginning to comprehend what he was dealing with. "Who are you?" he whispered. Sarah's voice was calm and professional. "Someone you should have left alone." She secured both men with zip ties, efficiently and without wasted motion. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your friends are going to leave Mr. Peterson alone. You're going to leave Betty alone. You're going to find other ways to entertain yourselves that don't involve bullying innocent people." Dale's face was pale in the streetlight. "You can't do this. This is our town. We have rights." "So does everyone else," Sarah replied. "The difference is, now you know there are consequences for forgetting that." The older man emerged from the hardware store, apparently frustrated by his unsuccessful search. He stopped short when he saw his associates secured on the ground and Sarah standing calmly in the middle of the street. Unlike the others, he didn't seem surprised. His eyes took in the tactical efficiency of what had been done, the professional restraints, the way Sarah held herself. "Military?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded once. "You?" "Marines. 2 tours in Iraq." He looked around, noting that none of his other men were visible. "I'm guessing my perimeter team isn't coming to help." "They're taking a nap," Sarah confirmed. The former Marine studied her carefully. "Navy?" "Among other things." Understanding dawned in his eyes. There was only one Navy unit that produced people capable of what he was seeing. "SEAL?" Sarah didn't answer directly, but her silence was confirmation enough. The older man slowly raised his hands, showing he wasn't reaching for a weapon. "This was supposed to be easy money," he said quietly. "Dale said you were just some homeless woman who got lucky." "Dale says a lot of things," Sarah replied. "Most of them wrong." The former Marine nodded toward his restrained associates. "What happens now?" "Now you collect your people and leave. Tonight, and for good. Find somewhere else to play soldier." "And if we don't?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "Then you'll discover that there are still people in this world who are much more dangerous than you are." The former Marine looked around at his defeated team, then back at Sarah. Whatever he saw in her eyes convinced him that continuing this confrontation would be a mistake. "We're done here," he said finally. Within 30 minutes, all 8 men had been collected and loaded into their trucks. The former Marine was the last to leave, pausing to look back at Sarah one final time. "For what it's worth," he said, "I respect what you did. But Dale's not going to let this go. He'll find another way to come at you." "Let him try," Sarah replied. As the trucks disappeared into the night, Mr. Peterson emerged from his store, looking shaken but unharmed. "I've never seen anything like that in my life," he said quietly. Sarah was already changing back into civilian clothes, becoming once again the unremarkable woman who had walked into the diner that afternoon. "Sometimes people need to be reminded that actions have consequences," she said simply. But as she settled in for what remained of the night, Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Dale Carpenter's type didn't learn from defeat. They just got angrier and more dangerous. She had bought herself some time and probably saved some future victims. But the peace she had been seeking was now further away than ever. The retired Navy SEAL operator had tried to leave her past behind, but tonight had proven that some skills could never truly be buried. Whether she wanted it or not, she was back in the game, and this time the stakes were personal.